Hello. In this lesson, what we're going to do is we're going to focus on a particular part of the quadratic formula that actually is kind of a warning sign and gives you a signal about how many answers to anticipate ahead of time. We're going to use 3 examples to guide us in order to kind of self-discover the result for ourselves. So here's the first one. Our goal is going to be to solve by using the quadratic formula to tell us how many x-intercepts there are or what the x-intercepts are. So here's the first one. I'm going to zoom in on it. I've kind of already shown you some of the steps in your note packet I've already filled in. If I wanted to find the x-intercepts, I would set this equal to 0. And then I'd go picking items out. Let's do this. So I would say A is 2, B is 6, C is 5, and then I just drop into the quadratic formula. Quadratic formula says x is equal to negative b plus or minus the square root of b squared minus 4ac all over 2a. When I drop the items in, it looks like that. I end up getting 36 minus, well, 4 times 2 is 8, and 8 times 5 is negative, will be 40, and I'm subtracting 40, so I end up getting, look, I get a negative 4. If I try to take the square root of a negative, it will not work. There are no numbers that I can multiply by themselves to make negative 4, because either the number is positive and a positive times a positive is a positive, or the number is negative and a negative times a negative is positive. So the square root of negatives leave us with no solutions right now. So if I try to run the quadratic formula and the part underneath the square root, it has a particular name we'll learn about here in a moment. It's called the discriminant. If that value underneath the square root is a negative, you're going to get no solutions. So the first one has no solutions because that value underneath the square root is a negative. So there's the first one. If the value underneath the square root is a negative, you're going to get no solutions. Second one looks like this. Again, if I want to find the x-intercepts, I set y equal to 0, and I'm going to use the quadratic formula to solve. A is 1, B is negative 1, C is negative 7. I drop it into the quadratic formula, and then I just go simplifying. Underneath the square root, I'm going to end up getting 1 plus 28. That's 29, and I can take the square root of 29. It's going to be a decimal, so I'll be able to do plus or minus, and because I can do plus or minus, I'm going to get 2 solutions. And there they are. The actual answers are the least important part right now. The most important part that I want you to focus on is this right here. Because this value underneath the square root was a positive, I can take square roots of positives and I'm going to get 2 solutions. So the first one had a negative, no solutions. This one had a positive, we're going to get 2 solutions. The last case is shown in the third example. In the third example, again, I'm trying to find the x-intercept, so y is 0, a is 4, b is negative 12, c is 9. I drop into the quadratic formula and I go running it, and I end up getting 144 minus 144, and that's 0. And the square root of 0 I can do, but I'm not going to get 2 solutions because there's no such thing as negative 0. So I'm only going to get 1 answer. So the takeaway here was because this value underneath the square root was equal to 0, I only got 1 solution. And there's kind of the summary. If the value underneath the square root is negative, no solutions. If the value underneath the square root is positive, 2 solutions. If the value underneath the square root is 0, I get 1 solution. And I'm going to use Desmos to kind of show these 3. Here's the first one. This is what the graph of it looks like. Look, has no x-intercepts because that value underneath the square root was a negative. This one had 2 x-intercepts because I could take the square root of a positive number. The value underneath the square root was positive, and this last one only has 1 x-intercept. It just bounces right off the x-axis, and the reason why is because its value underneath the square root was 0. And you can take the square root of 0, but it's only going to be 1 number because you can't have negative 0. That value underneath the square root has a name. It's called the discriminant. It's called that because it's discriminating against how many answers you're going to get. You're either going to get 2, 1, or 0 in the value of that discriminant, the red part, and it's just the part underneath the square root. You don't need to take the square root of it. It's just the b squared minus 4ac part. Maybe even should write that down. The discriminant is equal to just b squared minus 4ac. That value will tell you how many solutions, how many x-intercepts you're going to get. And that's what we're focusing on today. Not even really caring what the answers, the x-intercepts are, just how many there's going to be. If this is positive, 2. If this is 0, 1. If this is negative, no x-intercepts. Desmos does a really good job of showing this. So here I'm going to use a little slider to change the discriminant. So here's the discriminant again, b squared minus 4ac. So look, right now the discriminant is negative. As long as the discriminant stays negative, you're going to have no as long as the discriminant stays negative, you're going to have no x-intercepts. Once that discriminant hits 0, though, look, you have one x-intercept, just hits and bounces. And once that discriminant is positive, you're always going to have 2 x-intercepts because you can take the square roots of positive numbers and get 2 answers. So if your discriminant is positive, 2 x-intercepts. Once your discriminant becomes 0, you get 1 x-intercept, and if your discriminant is negative, you can't take square roots of negative numbers, you're going to get no x-intercepts. No solutions for your equation. Here's a little table that we're going to use to summarize. This is the value of the discriminant. If your discriminant is greater than 0, that's another way of saying positive, you're going to get 2 x-intercepts. If your discriminant, so this is that discriminant value, if your discriminant is equal to 0, you're going to get 1 x-intercept because you can take the square root of 0, but you're only going to get the 0 case. Though there's no such thing as negative 0. This last one is if your discriminant is negative, you're going to get no x-intercepts. It will not cross the x-axis. You're going to get no solutions. So number of solutions and number of x-intercepts correspond. Here's the type of questions that they'll ask you. They'll give you an equation, and they're going to ask you how many solutions or how many x-intercepts the graph of that equation would have. Well, the first thing I need to do is I need to set it equal to 0 in order to find what a, b, and c would be. So I need to subtract 2x here, and I need to write it from highest power to lowest power. So now I have it equal to 0, and then I write what a, b, and c are. A is equal to 3, b is equal to -2, c is equal to -7. And then I just find what the discriminant is. The discriminant is just b squared minus 4ac. b is -2, so I have -2 squared minus 4 times a is 3 times c is -7. -2 squared is 4. 4 times 3 is 12 times -7 is -84, so I have minus a -84. Minus a negative is plus, so I get 88. My discriminant is positive, so if you need to, you go back to your table. Your discriminant is positive, you're going to have 2 solutions, or if they're asking you about the graph, you'd have 2 x-intercepts. So what was the question asking you? The question was asking you how many solutions. You would say there's going to be 2 solutions, and you need to justify, you need to explain how you know. And the reason why is since the discriminant is greater than 0. Let's use Desmos to check. We'll use Desmos to see what the graph looks like. What does the graph look like for this? So the equation was, what, 3x squared minus 2x minus 7. So 3x squared minus 2x minus 7. And there's the graph for it. And you'll see, indeed, there are 2 x-intercepts. And that's all it's asking me is how many there are. You could also use your graphing calculator. If you go up to y equals, clear out any equation in there, 3x squared, subtract 2x, don't do negative, subtract 7, and then hit window, choose option 6 to standard window to make sure nobody's altered your window. And look, you'll see there are 2 x-intercepts, so we've done it correctly. I'm going to ask you to try, and then that'll be it. So I just want to know how many x-intercepts does this graph have. So find your answer by calculating the discriminant. So pause the video now, unpause it once you've had a chance to try. Okay, welcome back. Let's find it. All we need to know is what b squared minus 4ac is. B is 5, so I get 5 squared minus 4 times a is a 1 times c is 8. That's going to leave me at 25 minus 4 times 1 is 4 times 8 is 32. That makes -7. I can't take the square roots of negatives, so this is going to have 0 x-intercepts. None. If you use Desmos or your graphing calculator to check, you will see the same thing. Let's do it. Clear this out. It was x squared. I believe it was plus 5x plus 8. Yep, x squared plus 5x plus 8 You can just hit graph now because I know the window's all good, and you'll look and see it doesn't have any x-intercepts, and the reason why is because the discriminant is negative and I can't take square roots of negatives. That is it. Thank you very much, and have a good one.